from, I guess I have two channels going here, the Cooley Kyle on YouTube and the Constant Thought and Prayer on Rumble. But anyways, welcome back, guys. I am going to continue to try. I believe my dual streaming is working, which I'm actually excited about. So thank you for your patience on this, and let's wait and see when it pops up so I can get the chat up here as well on got my blue water in the way so I can get everything organized. But anyways, yesterday I felt like I really missed some stuff in the Bible study. So I just wanted to get back into where I felt like I basically fell short there. So what I meant to do was get into this.
Bunch of seniors and juniors, a couple sophomores.
I meant to get into this content of this professor from Ozarks. Let's see, where's he from? His name is Shane J. Wood, and I wanted to actually get into the Book of Revelation because he has 22 audio lectures and 19 video lectures, which I felt like were going to be pretty good. And so I wanted to see what he thought and maybe go through this with you guys in the audio lectures, as well as I have this like little entry video as well on Revelation 1. It says 1A. So just because I ran out of time yesterday and I gave somebody my phone number, blew up my phone. So the video froze, but we're going to listen to this. And this is on the Bible study. So in that same thumbnail that I put in when you first click open the video, basically should show, well, actually it's on there from yesterday. I don't think it's on there today, but it will show the Bible study that I'm doing in the Bible app if you guys want to join me. So this is a 2-minute video, but feel free to comment as I'm going through this. And I don't think that I can screen share onto YouTube. I'm not yet that sophisticated. I guess I can turn this around and see if this actually will view what I'm doing. Because then everybody on Rumble will see that as well. Okay, so let's take a minute and do that.
Whichever John it was, he makes clear in the opening paragraph what kind of book he has written. He calls it, first of all, a revelation or apocalypse. The Greek word is apokalypsis, and it refers to a type of literature very familiar to John's readers from the Hebrew scriptures and from other popular Jewish texts. Apocalypses recounted a prophet's symbolic dreams and visions that revealed God's heavenly perspective on history and current events so that the present could be viewed in light of history's final outcome. And John says this apocalypse is a prophecy, which means it's a word from God spoken through a prophet to God's people, usually to warn or comfort them in a time of crisis. By calling this book a prophecy, John's saying that it stands in the tradition of the biblical prophets and is bringing their message to a climax. And this apocalyptic prophecy was sent to real people that John knew. The book opens and closes as a circular letter that was sent to 7 churches in the ancient Roman province of Asia. Now, 7 is a meaningful number for John. It's a symbol of completeness based on the 7-day Sabbath cycle in the Old Testament. And John has woven 7s into every single part of this book. Now, with this opening, John has given us clear guidance about how he wants us to understand this book. Jewish apocalypse is communicated through symbolic imagery and numbers. It is not a secret predictive code about the timing of the end of the world. Rather, John is constantly using these symbols that are drawn from the Old Testament, and he expects his readers to go discover what the symbols mean by looking up the text he's alluding to. Also, the fact that it's a letter means that John is actually addressing the situation of these first-century churches. And so while this book has much to say to Christians of later generations, the book's meaning must first be anchored in the historical context of John's time, place, and audience.
All right, so I felt like that was interesting. And it's also interesting because this professor gets into talking about basically what Revelation means and how it's interpreted, because for a lot of people it is kind of like the apocalyptic end of the world type scenario. But he ends up basically getting into this, and he's like, it's really not, because a lot of people just want to jump to the end and be like, oh no, it's the end of the world, and it's like, and there's people that think that they know. And the Bible literally says that nobody will know the time or place. So this is interesting. I probably will go through this as well, and I think that adds, well, I guess I'm kind of curious. So I will go through part of this video. So I think that was 1A of the videos on Revelation. But let me see if there was another one. And sometimes I feel like, so the second part is 1B through 3. So maybe I'll do that one as well, because I feel like that one's interesting also. And these are pretty short, minute 43. So hang out with me for a minute 43.
Which brings us into the book's first section, Jesus' message to the 7 churches. John was exiled on the island of Patmos, and he saw a vision of the risen Jesus exalted as King of the world. And he was standing among 7 burning lights. And John's told this is a symbol of the 7 churches in Asia Minor that's been adapted from the book of the prophet Zechariah. And Jesus starts addressing the specific problems that face each church. Some were apathetic due to wealth and affluence. Others were morally compromised. Their people were still eating ritual meals and sleeping around in pagan temples. But others among the churches remained faithful to Jesus, and they were suffering harassment and even violent persecution. And Jesus warns that things are going to get worse. A tribulation is upon the churches that will force them to choose between compromise or faithfulness. By John's day, the murder of Christians by the Roman Emperor Nero was past, and the persecution of Christians by Emperor Domitian was likely underway. And so the temptation was to deny Jesus, either to avoid persecution or simply to join the spirit of the Roman age. And Jesus calls them to faithfulness so that they can overcome, or literally conquer. And Jesus promises a reward for everyone in these churches who does conquer. Each reward is drawn directly from the book's final vision about the marriage of heaven and earth. And so this opening section, it sets up the main plot tension that will drive the storyline in this book. Will Jesus' people endure? Will they inherit the new world that God has in store? And why is faithfulness to Jesus described as conquering? The rest of the book is John's answer.
I actually feel like that's pretty solid. It's super interesting too when you think about conquering versus compromise versus faithfulness, and how many times do we get caught up in compromise where we think that we're basically, well, we're trying to serve 2 masters, right? And it just doesn't work. But I know that I continue to try it many times. So what I thought would be interesting is maybe you guys can listen to some of this audio lecture. I'm gonna see what's going on over here on Rumble real quick and check this out. What I thought would be interesting is maybe you guys, there it is. So I'm just seeing if anybody has messaged me here, because this platform is growing as well. So I don't know if this is interesting, but I felt like the book of Revelation had a lot more in it than I thought. So this actually gets into, I'm going to jump into this one lecture that is, it's actually 55 minutes long, talking about what is prophecy. And I felt like that was interesting because his take on it was
Good evening.
so much different than mine. Because I feel like when something is prophetic, it's, speaking or seeing into the future of current events, but well, he'll dive down into it. So check this out real quick.
Good. We see some new faces here this week. That's great. Well, the way I'd like to start off tonight is I know you guys said it's some homework, and I'd like to start off with some comments or questions that you may have had from the homework. I'm not going to open it up to complaints because I know we would probably have a lot of hands raised. then. But comments or questions, what did you experience through the homework? How was it, maybe reading the book of Revelation with no chapters and verse divisions and different things like that? Yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I did it this afternoon.
Okay.
So I was in a little bit of a rush,
Okay.
but I did like the continuity of it, and I really liked it. It was definitely a bring you up and then bring you back down sort of thing. I like that it it started off very I don't know, great introduction, great one for again. But I guess the thing that I liked most about it was that it was like the warmest and kindest at the beginning and end. And then in the middle was where it was very, I guess, dreamlike.
That's interesting. In a couple of weeks, we'll come back to that because we talked about structure. So that's interesting. How there's almost like a bracket or a bookend around the book that's interesting. What else? Any questions or anything that may have come up? You have a question or comment?
Comment about the contract between D-Day and V-Day.
Yeah, that's a very I love that picture of the Normandy and stuff like that, and how we have already won the battle, but the victory isn't consummated until V-Day. Yeah, we're living in between the already and the not yet. That's a very important concept throughout the whole New Testament, especially. Very important that we do experience some of the blessings that we will experience in the fullness whenever Christ comes a second time. What else? Good stuff. Good stuff. Any questions or anything that maybe wasn't clear in the readings or anything like that? Yes.
The hat you was wearing in the petrol around that word.
Yeah, I was asking my brother if he's referring to the newspaper article. I said, that's not vain, right? I said, it's a really good article. I wasn't doing it for the picture.
Hello, I don't know how to pronounce that. Eds, 5 Eds. Hey, brother, how's it going from England? And Seymour, you better take care of that ASAP. Guys, we're checking out the book of Revelation. So I feel like this is like a hot topic, but getting into it, it's taking a little bit of time to get some traction. But I found a guy that, I don't know if you saw the beginning of this, but he basically has a bunch of lectures, and so you guys are catching up to where I'm at. I'm just kind of listening to some of his students give some feedback on their initial, I think they read the first chapter and kind of like getting into the whole thing. So, yeah, we need to see if Seymour's okay before he has an accident. Many people probably are on the John while they're listening to YouTube, but anyways, I'm going to keep going. Let me know if you have questions or comments. Seds, or what is your name, sir or ma'am?
I really wasn't. I really hope that article kind of was a good introduction. Yes, the hat. Matter of fact, this is interesting. I'll tell you a little story. The reason why that picture actually even made it in the newspaper is because they came into seminary. That's whenever I had hair down to about here a couple of weeks ago. And they came in there and said they were surprised to see hippies going to the seminary. I was like, well, I wouldn't claim to be a hippie, but whatever works, I guess. Anything else? Any other questions or comments?
Oh, accidentally muted it.
Last week we went through kind of we started off going through the introduction.
And welcome. So it's five Eds, is that right? I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but yeah. So we did the introduction already, but I felt like I kind of weeded that out of the course, unless you were actually going to do the class online with this guy. But it sounds like it's like one of the most intense classes that they offer.
I kind of talked about the different perspectives on the book of Revelation. Some people ignore it. Some people are obsessed with it. And my attitude toward the book of Revelation is that I want us to not ignore it, nor be obsessed with it, but...
I think that's a great point, too. And I don't know, 5 Eds, what do you think about it? Because I feel like many people, it's like they want to go all fanatical on it. And it's like, we're going to prep for the end of the days. And it's like, well, preparation how, right? I feel like the preparation is not just in the physical manner. So many people get this wrong, but it's like, yes, that's important. But what's really important, believe is preparing your heart and your relationship with God is ultimately my thought about it.
Be transformed by it. And that to me is a different attitude, a different drive than what we see common and in the common religious society at large. Because we either flat out ignore it, nobody ever talks about it, or that's all they ever talk about. And it needs to be somewhere more in the middle. And I also talked about last week about my approach, about how the principle of humility and the principle of submission and the principle of context. Remember that big catchword that I was hammering last week, and we will hammer for the next 9 weeks. Context, context, context. Why is context so important? Why is it? Why is it? Yes. It tells us, I mean, if you don't have context, then you can do whatever you want with whatever words are on the page. I use this example. It's not even a good example, but it just proves the point. That I can take the word calendar and I can create a whole cult out of the word calendar. I can pull it away and I can say that actually that word spells out this ancient God, that I am in the form of that God and my name is Calendar. I'll just pronounce it different. And then I can create it. But people do this. This is what people do with words and with phrases. And I talked about last week how I can take four passages from the Bible, string them together, and prove to you that you need to do something not very uplifting. And the way I did it was I said, Judas went out and hung himself. Therefore, go and do likewise. And what you're going to do quickly. See, those are all Bible passages, but I've taken them all out of context. And if I take them out of context, I can do whatever I want. Right? So our goal in Bible study is to read the words that are found in the Bible in the original context. And then we will be able to apply it to our lives. But we've got to do this first step first. Otherwise, it's chaos. There's as many interpretations then as there are people. Does that make sense? Okay. And then we started talking about, we started defining some of the terms that get tossed around a lot in the Revelation discourse. The first one we talked about was the literal versus figurative debate. And basically what I proposed was that instead of trying to read the book of Revelation literally or figuratively, we need to read it naturally. And there's a big difference. Because literally, if I am literally saying something as a symbol, then you need to literally interpret it as a symbol. Does that make sense? The example I used last week was that you were driving me crazy. Now, literalistic, the interpretation would be that you're putting me in a vehicle and you are driving me to a place that is called crazy. But that's not what I'm really meaning whenever I'm saying that, is it? I am meaning that you are annoying me, right? Does that make sense? So you need to read, you need to understand or interpret what I am saying naturally. And the natural interpretation of it may be a symbol. Are we all following me right now? Does that make sense? In other words, let the author say what the author's trying to say. Does that make sense? I'm seeing some heads nod, some confusion. I know I'm going through this quick, but you can get the notes if I'm confusing you. Then we talked about the phrase last days. And how did we see the Bible defining the words last days through the passages we looked at? Yes. The time period between the first coming and the second coming. And that's a radically different definition than what we function.
I apologize. I feel like I started this podcast somehow and I can't figure out how to pause it. But yeah, this is, right now, this is actually pretty good, but I'm going to let them keep going. Just let me know if you guys have any questions in the comment section.
From the moment that Jesus came here until he comes again. In context, that's what those 6 passages mean. And so we said, if we're going to allow the Bible to transform us instead of us transforming the Bible, then that's the definition we should submit to as well. You follow me so far?
Amen.
Okay. Now we're going to finish up last week's lecture because we're on page 7 of the first week's handout. Page 7. And I want to be, and it's only the bottom 2 lines of page 7, so you can flip to page 8 if you want. But we're going to be defining what is prophecy. What is prophecy? Because when you're talking about the book of Revelation, that is the huge word that always comes up, doesn't it? And here's my problem, is that we use the word prophecy so much, but we never even ask the question, what does it mean? We don't ask it. We just assume that we know it, don't we? I'm not going to ask you what your definition of it is yet. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. What I want to do is this. I've taken 4 different sections of society, and I have listed different examples of the way in which they define prophecy. And then I want to ask the question, after those 4 sections of society, how does the Bible define the word prophecy? But you know, this concept is pervasive in our society, is it not? You can prove that.
Just reading about that, but it feels like there's so much. There's like the great ability to get off track and to think you know what something means, right? And so this is one of my favorite points that he made in the entire sermon where I saw him preach. I'm probably not going to go too much longer, especially I don't necessarily. I feel like I may not have this set up properly, but I think I am figuring it out here.
Easily, and I did this a couple of weeks ago. If you type in the word prophecy into Google, you will get over 20 million websites that are related to this word.
20
Our
million.
society is a little bit interested in this concept.
It's a lot.
They want to know what prophecy is. And so the first thing I want to look at is the doomsday cults. We've all heard about these phenomenons from here and there throughout the news history or whatever. I don't even know. Throughout something. But the first one I want to talk about is in 1993. There was a man by the name of Vernon Howell who began preaching to a sect of the Seventh-day Adventists. And he described his teaching as the revelation of the sealed scroll in Revelation chapter 5. He said that he was the foretold lamb of Revelation chapter 5. You know, the slain lamb that has the power to open the scroll? He says that was me. And as a result, Vernon Howell said, I am heir then to David's throne, and that's why he renamed himself David Koresh. And what David Koresh then began to do is he began teaching the Branch Davidians that the coming Armageddon was about to happen, that Armageddon was about to occur. And as you all know, in 1993, at their what's the word? Compound. Thank you. I was thinking convent.
The compound. The compound is not a convent.
There, though. Thank you. At their compound in Waco, Texas, they had their own Armageddon. Problem was, it didn't spread into a worldwide battle. It ended up with the killing of almost all of their lives. But this is the question I'm asking, though. How has he defined prophecy?
For you guys that are just joining, we're getting into the word prophecy. I feel like it's interesting because there's just this preconceived notion so many times, but I'm curious if you would write in the comments section what you think it is as we listen to this. I don't know if he's going to continue to go deeper, but it was really interesting. Great sermon.
Keep that in mind. We're going to keep going. You also have March 23rd, 1997. A man by the name of Marshall Applewhite convinced 39 men and women. He basically convinced them of a teaching of prophecy. But the problem was none of them were asking the question, what is prophecy?
There we go.
And what he ended up teaching them is that the Bible had revealed that there was a comet coming by, and it was a UFO spaceship that was in it or behind it. And that if they would kill themselves, they would be the martyrs talked about in Revelation that would be immediately transferred up to heaven's gates, which is where they got their name. And so 39 men and women on March 23rd, 1997 killed all their lives thinking they would be immediately transferred to this UFO.
I don't know if any of you guys are old enough to remember that, but like I think I remember a lot of like the year 2000 people were like doing things like this just because they felt like, oh, this is when the world is ending. So I mean, we've gone from everything from like the EMPs to the aliens, the Y2K. It was called the Y2K crash. So it's just interesting how people think that they know, but they don't. Well, let's see what he says. I think that they don't really know, and that's like the emphasis of this book is that you don't know, and so you need to be somewhere in between. There's preparation, and then there's the continuous walk into the faith where you're just continuously like devouring this so that you are ready for the time and day, right?
How has he defined prophecy? Because it sounds an awful lot like the way David Koresh defined it. But we'll get to that in a bit. March 17th, 2007, 924 people were convinced of the prophetic messages that they were supposed to burn themselves alive in Uganda. And they did.
Wow.
Late 1980s, a man by the name of Jeffrey Lundgren killed a family of 5 based off his interpretation of biblical prophecy. Not to mention the late 1970s, whenever a man by the name of Jim Jones convinced 914 people to kill themselves based off what?
Wow.
His definition of prophecy. See, all of these cults have something in common, is they have the same definition of the word prophecy. Which, what you're going to notice is that even the secular culture has the same definition.
It's kind of wild, right? I mean, how many times has that happened? I mean, and those are just the times that he's talking about, but I'm sure there's been tons.
The secular culture is obsessed with at least 2 areas of prophecy. Number 1, you have the horoscopes. It's this section of the newspaper that's actually one of, if not the most popular section of the newspaper. Because people are obsessed with hearing these little prophetic words spoken into their lives. They define prophecy the same way as the cults do. But not only that, we also have these psychics. You know, we've turned people like Miss Cleo into millionaires off of our definition of prophecy. Why do people call them Miss Cleo or people like her? What's that? They want to know the future. They want to know their good fortunes or misfortunes so that maybe they can, I don't know, maybe they can dodge them or maybe they can grab a hold of them. I don't know. The point is, they're still functioning off the same definition of prophecy as the doomsday cults. Same definition. Let's move now, though, a little bit closer to home. The Christian community at large defines prophecy, I'm going to suggest, in the exact same way as the 2 previous sections. I've got this book, I showed it last week, Charting the End Times. This is how we define prophecy. What we do with prophecy is we make maps.
Hey, Mom, Lori says prophets were well studied in history. They saw repeating of history over the years and what would or could be happening in current times, thus fulfillment of Old Testament in the New Testament. That's actually really interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard of this thing called the Elliott wave theory, but it basically talks about the cyclical patterns of things in our society. And I know that they were definitely studying that, but it's also interesting how they connect it, right? I'm going to keep going.
And what is this a map of? How the world's going to end. That's what it is. This is how we define prophecy. The same thing is found in have you ever read or heard of the book The Late Great Planet Earth? Hal Lindsey? In 1974 is one of, that decade of the 70s? It actually sold more copies than the Bible in that decade. It's a pretty popular book. Interestingly enough, he's had to revise it because you see his key prophecy in the book was that the world was going to, that Jesus was come back, the second coming was going to occur in 1988. Do you know where he gets that number? What happened in 1948? Israel became a nation. See, and based off of Matthew 24, they said that one generation later was whenever Jesus would come back and establish his kingdom. And scholars, this is a truth like across the scholarship, is that a generation is about 40 years. That's just what all scholars believe. And so, 1948 plus 40 years equals 1988. Well, we're in 2008. We have a problem. But this is interesting because because Tim LaHaye also supported this prophecy. But whenever it didn't happen, they did something interesting. They said, well, a generation can also mean anywhere from 40 to 120 years, which would put Hal Lindsey at 139 and LaHaye at 142 years old. So I guess it'd be hard to tell them they're wrong twice.
Curious, what do you guys think a generation is, just out of curiosity?
But then you also have Edgar Weisnot, who published a book called 88 Reasons Why the Rapture will happen or will occur in 1988. You have Pat Robinson, who predicted the end of the world would happen in 1982. And I want to point out something really quick. Yes?
Is Tim LaHaye one of the authors of the Left Behind series?
Yes, he is. Tim LaHaye and Jim Jenkins are the Left Behind series authors. I want to point out, though, on page 9, why I get so excited or impassioned at this point is because that website up at the top is a website created by a non-Christian that lists every single time and documents every single time that a Christian has made a prophecy and it hasn't come true. Did you catch that?
Interesting.
This is a non-Christian. And we're going to talk about why that's important here in a minute. I want to also, but my point is this though. What is their definition of prophecy? You see what I'm saying? Are you drawing the lines? Are you connecting the dots? The same definition of prophecy from the doomsday cults is the same definition of the secular culture at large, which is the same definition of the Christian culture at hand. Now, we also have other faith-based communities. I don't know why I wrote 19th century under Jehovah's Witnesses. It's supposed to be 20th, because if you look at my first date, it's 1914, so I'm not sure what I was thinking there.
Okay, real quick, and I feel like this is interesting. And I actually went into a resource that I like called Got Questions, but it's like a biblical perspective of it. It says, how can we trust that biblical prophecy can indeed predict the future? So I'm going to read some of this real quick, just in between where he's chatting, because I feel like this is very interesting to me. It says the main reason we can trust biblical prophecy is that it, like the rest of Scripture, was written literally, God breathed by the creator of the universe. I feel like I read that wrong. It was written literally, God breathed. Okay, so that is what it says. But it is inherent, perfect, and true. We must understand that before we can understand the role of biblical prophecy, it says to see why is it important to believe in biblical inerrancy. Biblical prophecy plays two roles. It foretells the future and it explains what the positive or negative result of future events will be. Prophecy, my phone's slightly in the way. Prophecy may announce events that bring joy and pleasure or fear and foreboding. When prophecy is ignored, it is usually because the hearers don't like what they hear for one reason or another. Biblical prophecy is not usually general in nature. It normally is very specific as to how it will affect someone or something. But it is always dependable and worthy of our complete trust. We can allow prophecy to help shape our lives, giving us direction and guidance in serving the Lord. It should be a source of strength and instruction for us, unlike what we hear called prophecy today. Both in the church and outside the church, true biblical prophecy is always accurate and precise. What God prophesies always occurs. So, what do you guys think about that? There's a couple more paragraphs and I can keep reading. But I thought I might just insert that into the middle of listening to Shane talk about it. But it says, I'll just keep going. The prophecy of the flood in Genesis Chapter 6 is an example. God explains his reasons for the flood, gives specific instruction for Noah to build the ark to preserve lives, then produces this first great worldwide catastrophe. Afterwards, God prophesied that he would never flood the whole earth again. In Genesis chapter 9, verses 12 through 16. Joseph's dreams in Genesis chapter 37, verses 5 through 10, contain prophecies that come to pass later in his life. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18, God says to Moses, I will raise them up for a prophet like you from among their brothers. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him. This prophecy predicts the Jewish Messiah, our Lord Jesus, and is quoted in Acts chapter 3, verses 23 through 26. One of the most detailed prophecies of the Messiah in Isaiah chapter 53 contains predictions of Christ's ministry, sin-bearing, and suffering. Psalm 22 gives another prophecy of the Lord's suffering, couched in a description of troubled time in King David's life. Like, that's interesting. So Says in our Lord's own prophecies in Matthew chapter 24, he spoke of wars, famines, earthquakes, persecutions, and betrayals, and finally his own return, unexpected and widely rejected today. This and other end time prophecies are as dependable as Noah's warning of the flood. Similar predictions of catastrophic events still to come are found in 2 Peter chapters 2 and 3, together with the prediction in 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 7 of God's intervention, and in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verses 13 through 18. Christians are promised a rescue or a resurrection appointment. Whether we're alive or dead, biblical prophecy provides us a roadmap of the future. To fail to understand these prophecies of the rapture is to miss one of the greatest gifts of God. It says finally, since we can trust John 3:16 that God loves us and gave us his only son, surely we can rely on him as author of biblical prophecy to predict, to encourage, to direct, and to provide for our future physical and spiritual needs. Our Lord said, in John chapter 14 verse 2, in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would not have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you, and that should be a prophecy of assurance and encouragement for all Christians, so you can place your trust in God's prophecies just as you placed your trust in his son. I think that that's great, and I'm glad I looked that up because that was kind of a neat compliment to what we're listening with on the Shane J. Wood podcast. So I'm probably just going to do a little bit more because I got to go run some errands and shoot some guns, but check this out.
But they believe that the Jehovah's Witnesses, this is interesting actually, Jehovah's Witnesses taught that Armageddon would happen in 1914 and that Jesus would come and establish his kingdom on earth. And when it didn't happen, do you know what they said happened instead? They said, oh no, he came back. Only the elect can see him though. He's invisible. But now catch this. This may be able to, this for me connected some dots. The way Jesus now is ruling is he is the voice, the invisible force behind what they call the watchtower. And this is why whenever you're dialoguing with the Jehovah's Witness and you say, yeah, but what does the Bible say about that? Their response would be, who cares? The watchtower says this. And to us, that's just horrendous. But for them, if Jesus did come back in 1914 and establish the watchtower, and he is speaking through it today, why wouldn't you listen to the watchtower? Do you see their logic? It makes sense. Here's my problem, though. The Watchtower taught that in 1975 we would be experiencing the 6,000th anniversary of Adam's creation. And they got it through a bunch of scientific methods. But if it's Jesus talking, who cares, right? I don't care how they got it if it's Jesus talking. The reason behind this, though, I will explain this, is that 1,000 years they believe would pass for each day of creation. And at the seventh day, or the seventh millennium, would be the millennium of peace talked about in Revelation 20. And they believe that would occur in 1975. Problem is, we're in 2008. Do you see the problem? We're in 2008. What? Is that what whispering was for before? Okay. Whatever. I'm further ahead. You know what I'm saying. The point is we're in 2007. This is recorded. That's wonderful. I don't even know where I'm at anymore. My wife has to tell me how old I am. We're in 2007. I was wondering what the hisses were for. I was trying to figure that out. It's 7, but I was just hearing boos and hisses. I figured, wow, this is what the prophets must have felt like. Okay, anyway. The point is that we're in 2007. We're at least 22 years or 32 years removed from this prophecy. Not to mention the Watchtower has predicted that the world would end or the millennium would begin in 1914, 1915, 1918, 1920, 1925, 1941, 1975, and 1994. Now, if this is Jesus talking, do you see my problem? However, How are they defining the word prophecy? Do you catch that? It's the same way as the other three groups before them. They're doing the same thing. They're looking at prophecy the exact same way. And I won't leave out the Mormons. Mormonism defines prophecy the same way as well. As a matter of fact, Joseph Smith was praying earnestly one time because he wanted to know when the Son of Man would come back. And he said, this is what he said. He said he received this voice, and the voice said this: Joseph, my son, if thou livest until thou art 85 years old, thou shalt see the face of the Son of Man. Therefore let this suffice, and trouble me no more on this matter. And Joseph Smith then said, I was left thus without being able to decide whether this coming referred to the beginning of the millennium, or to some previous appearing, or whether I should die and thus see his face. I believe the coming of the Son of Man will not be any sooner than that time. Joseph Smith decided to make this crystal clear on February 14th, 1835, whenever they got together for a meeting, and he says that Jesus would return in 56 years. Well, Joseph Smith died on June 27th, 1844, at the age of 38, and was fairly shy of his 85th birthday. But my question, once again, it's not to critique these positions. My question is to ask, how are they all defining prophecy? Now I'm looking for an answer. How are they defining prophecy? Foretelling the future. It's prediction. That's what they're defining it as, correct? Isn't that the way that we define it? I know I'm not looking for head nods because I don't want to put... I know you guys think he's going to pull a punch on me. No, but that's the way I defined it all my life. That's the way I was taught growing up. That's the way I believed all my life. But here's my question. More than I want to know what the doomsday cults believe, or what the secular culture believes, or even the Christian culture, or even other faith-based communities, what I want to know is, how does the Bible define the word prophecy? Because once again, that's more important to me. No offense. It's not that I don't appreciate you or anything along that matter. But my question is...
So, what do you guys think? What is your opinion, or what have you read in the Bible? Or where else would you draw that from? So that's my question.
Not how you define it, but how does the Bible define it?
Doesn't it give you more what and when?
What do you mean?
It tells you what's going to happen, not when it's going to happen.
Okay.
This also goes back to a very common trend that I feel like I see today, is where there's a lot of self-defining things, right? So like, I literally just asked that, but it is also like, I'm curious, what do we think versus what have we read? So like, if we like, I feel like the Bible is completely true and accurate, but I know that not everybody agrees with that. So I'm curious, what do you believe and how did you get there?
Okay, yeah. What you're getting at is what I want to get at, and that's this. What is the essence of prophecy? What would be the point if it's strictly prediction? And we're gonna get into that. What I want to do is this, really quick. I want to talk about the dangers of the definition of prophecy as prophecy equaling prediction. Here are the dangers. Number one, Jesus hasn't come back yet. And so there is one thing that all four of these sections of society have in common, and that's that every one of their prophecies have not come true. They're at least all consistent in that, is that they get all their prophecies about when Jesus was going to come back. At least this far, they're all wrong. But the problem is what happens on number 3, is how that damages our Christian witness. I've already talked about that entire website that is dedicated to documenting Christians making a fool of themselves, saying, oh yeah, Jesus is coming back. And here's how their logic is. Well, if they're wrong about the second coming, they're probably wrong about his first coming. I mean, if they can't get this right, how can I expect them to get this right? Oh, sure, he's God. What if you get that prediction wrong? Do you see the logic? Do you see how this kind of irresponsibility damages the gospel? It flat out makes it a mockery. Oh yeah, God knows everything, but his people can't get it right. How does the Bible talk about people that make prophecies that don't come true? And what does the Old Testament say we should do? I'm not suggesting we do this. What's that? Stone them. Now, why would the Old Testament say something like that?
Because it's taken very seriously.
Exactly. This is not something that they toy around with. Why? Because the false prophecies directly reflect upon the one in which they're speaking for.
In other words, if you're going to say something, you better make sure that you got it straight from God.
Exactly. If you're going to be speaking for God, make sure it's God speaking.
Yeah.
Here's another problem. Yes.
Do you remember one time that Pat Robinson was interviewed after he made a prediction with his country, and he said, predictions are no more than us trying to take documented facts and bring it into the future and talk about it. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't mean it won't happen. And he said, if I've done nothing else, I have led more people to Christ through the fear that the end times was going to happen now. I heard him say that. Well, the end.
I'm not going to respond to that.
And
I-
it's the scripture that God says he can use anybody
Yes, he can.
to accomplish his person or his reasons for his whatever he wanted to do for people who aren't even godly.
Yes, he can. Yes, he can.
Can you guys hear that okay on YouTube?
But still, I come back to my question. Is, to me, what's important is not Pat Robertson's excuses. It's the Bible's definition of prophecy. There is an interesting biblical precedent for prophecies or the second coming of Christ. If you flip to Matthew 24:36, does anybody know what this says off the top of their head? What is Matthew 24? Does anybody know what Matthew 24 is? Olivet Discourse. This is a huge prophetic chapter. Well, a huge... hold on. It's a huge chapter for those obsessed with prophecy. Let me put it that way. Matthew 24, verse 36 says this. No one knows about the day or the hour. Now, what day or hour is he talking about? The second coming, the end of the world. No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. And yet, you see my problem. Well, what about 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 3? Because I think this one actually is more interesting. Not that the words that Jesus says aren't interesting. That's not what I'm saying. Although I think that, the fact that it's in red letters should carry a little bit more weight. 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 3 says this, though. Now, brothers, about times and dates, we do not need to write to you. Is it because they already know? No. What does he go on to say? He says, verse 2, he says, for you know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. We'll talk about that in a second. While in verse 3 it says, while people are saying peace and security, destruction will come on them suddenly as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. Now Paul uses two distinct metaphors when he's talking about the second coming of Christ here. The first one is a thief in the night. Now here's my question. If you knew that a thief was coming to your house at 7:30 tonight, where would you be? At home. Exactly. You're going to be there waiting for the thief to come so that you can protect your house, right?
Of course.
But how often does the thief schedule a break-in with you? It doesn't happen very often, does it?
No.
If you know one, let me know. I'd like him to rob my house. It'd make things a lot easier. The point is this, is that thieves are not easily documented. They come unexpectedly. They come when you least know it. The point is that whenever you need to always be prepared in case a thief comes. And Paul says the second coming will be like a thief in the night. It's unexpected. You just need to be prepared at all times in case he comes now. Remember we talked about last week. There is nothing standing between now and eternity. It could happen at any moment. And the way you need to live your life is constant with two words in your mind, and that is perhaps today. That's what Paul is saying. He's saying, no, it's like a thief. And he also uses another metaphor, though. He talks about it being like a woman in labor pains. Now, there's one thing, when a woman starts having labor pains, that I've heard happen before. My wife hasn't done this, but I've heard happen before that it's interesting. They'll start feeling the pains and they'll realize it's a lot worse than what they thought it was going to be. And they'll say, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing it. I don't care. It's not happening. But when a woman starts having labor pains, there's one thing you know. The baby's coming. There's really not many choices. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. And Paul says the second coming is like the labor pains of a woman that is pregnant. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. There's no question about it. Jesus is coming back. So whenever you put those two together, what's he saying? It is going to happen, so you better be ready. Does that make sense? Yes.
Well, you know you're going to have the baby, but you don't know when.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. Labor could be, 4 hours, or some 20, it could be 30.
Yeah. Yes. And the bottom line of those two metaphors, though, it's so powerful, is the inevitability of the second coming and the unexpectedness of the second coming. And that for me, bucks up against this definition of prophecy equaling prediction. It is the biblical precedent of the second coming or the end of the world is that it is unexpected, but it will happen. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, we're going to keep developing.
Okay, guys. So I'm going to stop right there. We're about 30 minutes in on this, so I'm going to actually write that down. Because when we come back, I might actually come back tonight and do this. But we're at 29:15 on this sermon. But I feel like this is really interesting. I don't know if you guys feel the same way. I'm just going to look, basically going through this. I found some references of prophecy in the Bible. So I'll just close out reading this. I don't know if you guys have questions, but I'd gladly write those down or write them down in the comments, and I'll either answer them or I'll look into them and get back to you, because some of this stuff is over my head. So, but this says spiritual gifts, and I'm reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 12. It says spiritual gifts, unity and diversity. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I do not want you to be ignorant. You know that you were Gentiles. Carried away to these dumb idols. However, you were led. Therefore, I make known to you that no one speaking by the Spirit of God calls Jesus accursed, and no one can say that Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. There are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are the differences of ministries, but the same Lord. And there are diversities of activities, but it is the same God who works all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all. For to one is given the word of wisdom through the Spirit, to another the word of knowledge through the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the same Spirit, to another working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But one and the same Spirit works in all these things, distributing to each one individually as he wills. So I feel like it's just like a nice way to close out in understanding that this is something that is also not meant for everybody. It's specifically for certain individuals. But anyways, guys, I really appreciate you joining me. I'm sorry to cut this short. I would have loved to have gone all the way through that, but it'll give us more content. It'll be my third part of day one of this Bible study. But I feel like this is something that might be more interesting if we dig a little deeper on it, just to really get into the meat of the topic in the book. So anyways, I'm just going to close out in prayer, but if you guys have anything that you need specific prayer for, just put it in the comments. Check over here at Rumble. Nothing over there. So anyways, dear God, thank you for today. Thank you for just giving us this time to spend with you and with each other in deeper dive into this specific book in the Bible. And God, just pray that you continue to guide us through it so that we cannot add to or take away anything that you meant by what you had inspired to be written in this book. But God, just continue to bless our day, place a veil of protection over all of us, specifically as we go out and shoot guns. Just keep us safe. And for all those who are not doing anything that seems dangerous, but God, put them in a veil of your protection as well. But give us joy. We just continue to pray your peace, prosperity, and your promise over our life, and just allow us, God, to know our purpose as well. So let's step into that and walk faithfully forward. But thank you, God, for all that you do. Thank you guys for joining. Have a beautiful day, and may catch you either later today or tomorrow. But thanks again for joining, and I'll talk to you soon. All right.